also want to start to dig into like, hey, what does your warm-up look like? Like, what are you doing for your warm-up? Do you have, for pitchers, do you have an arm care program? Are you doing it? What does that look like? How hard is it? And like, what does your throwing program look like? Like, how many days a week are you throwing? When are your bullpens? What does your throwing program look like the whole year? Are you trying to throw like you are in season, the same way that you are in the winter? And of course, when you have young athletes, a lot of these times you can kind of sort of see these little glaring holes where you can kind of be like, oh, that's probably something we could target and something that we could change and fix to hopefully avoid you coming back here in the future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the world's favorite youth baseball podcast, Clearing the Bases, featuring Coach Jimmy, Phil, and Jerry. I'm David Friedman. I want to thank you for coming along on this ride with us.
Well, the other number that kind of pops up somewhere around that 75 to 80 pitch mark seems to be, if you're being really conservative, would be the mark where I would probably, like, if you're going to be really conservative, like, what's the most we can do to stop injuries? That seems to be the number where after that you're starting to edge into a little bit of damage. So the other couple studies that have come out, and they've both shown same things. They were on different body parts. The one on the top of my head was for the elbow and the other one was for the shoulder. And so they either did an MRI or an ultrasound on those body parts, and they did one before and after the game. So they took an MRI, looked at the results, then they got the kid to throw, and they would, several athletes to throw, and then however many pitches they would throw, they would kind of mark it down and then look at the ultrasound and MRI and see if anything changed.
For the first time on this show, we're going to leave the country. We're going to head up to the Great White North. And while we're there, we're going to talk a little bit about physical therapy. Now, I know as coaches, we've all had players that have probably had some kind of physical therapy. And what I'm excited about on this show is that we're going to get into a lot of things about physical therapy that I believe coaches should learn so that they know the signs of injury, so they know how to deal with injury. So we're going to switch things up here. We're going to go into the world of physiotherapy with Jay Huggins. So it was pretty cool as Jay reached out to me and, said that he had a program for baseball coaches to learn signs of fatigue and signs of injury and this type of thing. And I thought, what a great thing to bring on somebody that's going to be able to teach our coaches something that's a little bit different from what we've been doing. So, and the other thing which is really cool is Jay is our first Canadian guest. So welcome to the show, Jay.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Yeah, happy to represent Canada.
All right, so just so everybody knows out there, okay, just because you've heard me say it a lot of times that I'm not that bright, okay? So Jay and I just went through maybe about a half hour or so of the show, and I never hit the record button. So this is take two. So actually, everybody, you're lucky tonight because we already did like a little prelude, and now you're getting something like a polished episode here. So talk to me a little bit, Jay. Let's go through the Pioneer Coaches Education. Talk to me a little bit about that now, how that came about.
Yeah, so I'm a practicing physical therapist, so I see lots of patients from your arthritic knees to your typical low back pain, and being a former college athlete myself, I kind of like working with athletes, and we get some athletes in our clinic as well. So when I started my physical therapy practice, I just started to notice that every spring we would you'd kind of look on your schedule for the day, and all of a sudden you'd see these kind of 14, 15, 16, 12-year-old kids that are all coming in with arm pain. And it was just a lot more than your other sports, or at least a lot more preventable. It felt like a preventable injury as opposed to a football player getting his knee twisted or a basketball player spraining his ankle. And so, whenever we're dealing with an athlete, we want to get, or any person with pain really, we want to get to like, what's the root cause? Like, what was the kindling that started the fire to this injury and you ending up in my office? And so we kind of go through everything. Like we want to see the physical stuff, like how much can you lift your arm? How much strength do you have in your arm? But we also want to start to dig into like, hey, what does your warm up look like? Like, what are you doing for your warm up? Do you have for pitchers? Do you have an arm care program? Are you doing it? What does that look like? How hard is it? And like, what does your throwing program look like? Like, how many days a week are you throwing? When are your bullpens? What does your throwing program look like the whole year? Are you trying to throw like you are in season, the same way that you are in the winter? And of course, when you have young athletes, a lot of these times you can kind of sort of see these little glaring holes where you can kind of be like, oh, that's probably something we could target and something that we could change and fix to hopefully avoid you coming back here in the future. But just through kind of talking with athletes and getting to know them a little bit better, it kind of became a little bit apparent that there's this gap between sort of what's going on in the strength and conditioning, physical therapy world and what's going on in the coaching world. Like you go to these kind of physical therapy, continuing education events, or you listen to a physical therapy podcast and we're all kind of talking about this stuff. Like, yeah, everybody's doing this. This is kind of common sense. And then when you talk to coaches or listen to coaches podcasts or coaches talk in general, they're sometimes missing the big picture of like, hey, there's all this low hanging fruit that we know about that coaches would really benefit because they're the ones who are working and seeing the athletes every day. We don't get to see the athletes until they come in injured, and hopefully they only get to see us for a short period of time of like, hey, 3, 6, 12 weeks kind of thing. Whereas a coach is going to have that longer relationship. And so the better the coaches are educated, the better that they're going to be able to prevent injuries and stop, maybe buck that trend. Because we all know that arm injuries on the rise. There's, that big alarming trend that's going on in baseball. So, to summarize, it's just trying to bridge the gap between, the physical therapy and the coaches world and just try to empower coaches to be good health promoters for their kids and the team.
Yeah, it's tough because, I always look at it like a kid comes to you and, he says his arm hurts, okay? And as a coach, what level or how do I know how bad his arm is? Is it just sore? Is he really injured? I think coaches out there that I hope you think the way I do is that you're always going to err on the side of safety or caution and, get it looked at. And, this way we remove all doubt. But it's very difficult because we're trying to play the role of, well, not even playing the role of, we're trying to make that decision on the fly. And a lot of us don't even know, what the signs are that something is really bad.
Yeah, no, and it's a good question. And coaches are asked a lot as well. So I feel for the coaches out there. You're, therapists, coaches, health professionals trying to assess people and make a decision based on a kid's health. So, the way I kind of look at it is we'll sort of categorize stuff into sort of our red flags and sort of like our yellow flags. Your red flags is kind of, or maybe a red light would be a better analogy. Your red light is like, stop that. Like, they're not picking up a baseball until they get looked at by whether that's family doctor, physical therapist, athletic therapist, whatever the team or the environment or whatever that athlete has access to. So your red lights are numbness. When I say numbness, I'm talking about like you touch it and you lose sensation. Like sometimes people will talk about sort of like a burning, which can sometimes just be tendon pain, which fair enough, still err on the side of caution. But if you're losing sensation, obviously that's go see somebody right away. The other two that might not be so obvious, if you're getting any signs of swelling or you're getting any like stiffness. And when I say stiffness, like the common one for UCL injury would be the kid tries to straighten their arm, the athlete tries to straighten their arm, and they're just not able to do it, or it's really, really painful, and they really have to force themselves to do it. Or same thing with the shoulder, or they're kind of laying on their ground and they lift their arm up, and it's just, you can tell there's a big difference between the left and right side. For me, both though, that swelling, like pain, as you said, pain's not a great indicator of damage. Is the pain just damage, or is the pain just pain, or is it an injury? But that swelling, that loss of range of motion, or that numbness, those are kind of three things that are objectively saying like, hey, this is definitely an injury. It's not just pain. They're not just sore.
Well, I love that.
Then,
Oh, go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, and the other piece I was just kind of going to say, sort of our yellow lights of sort of like, hey, you know, monitor, make sure that they're going on the right track. The two things that are the three things I guess that I would put into that category are if a kid is either skipping an activity or complaining about that injury for more than 2 weeks. So let's say you've got a pitcher and you're saying like, hey, it's time for long toss. We want to start to air it out. And for a couple of weeks, they're just like, I can't air it out. It's been, my arm's too sore. I'm just going to stay at 90 feet today. Or, if you've got an athlete who's saying like, I'm not going to do all of any outie, or like, I can't do this drill. Like, I just need to save my arm because my arm's feeling a little tired. Both of those things, if basically the way an injury works, when you have these minor sprains and strains, after about a week or so, a lot of that inflammation goes away. And so people will be feeling a lot better. And then another week to kind of get them to adapt back into getting their sport. So by 2 weeks, I would expect that if it's just a minor sprain or strain, they're going to be back to going as normal. Whereas if it's been persisting longer than 2 weeks, that would kind of make me suspect like, hey, maybe it's a minor injury that you're managing poorly and they're on the injury pathway that could lead to something more and we need a better plan. Or B, the original injury that they had was maybe a little bit just something that you should ensure that it's not something more serious that could lead to a season ending or, several weeks or month ending injury.
Well, you just mentioned something that I hear a lot. So, a player will come up to me and say, hey, coach, I don't think I should throw in practice today because my arm feels tired. Okay.
Yeah.
I always have a hard time with that because I'm like, what does that mean? Like if I come to practice and I had a rough day at work and I come to practice and I'm tired, well, I'm pushing through it. So when you say my arm is tired, my first thought is, well, push through it. But is there something more to that?
You touched on a really good point there. We know that stress and fatigue, just in general, from a full body perspective, for a lot of different injuries, all that stuff's actually going to increase your risk of injury. So when you're stressed out, your body releases something called cortisol. And cortisol was really helpful when we were hunters and gatherers, because cortisol would say, hey, you've got some stress. You might need to go run and like chase down a bear or like fight somebody to, keep your spot and protect your home or, run away from a predator or something like that. And so cortisol's job is to basically break everything down and provide you quick energy. And so it's getting in the way of you recovering. So let's say I go to the gym a few times a week. I try to get stronger, lift as much weight as I can. Let's say, I go to the gym and I typically squat 250 or 300, let's just say 250 pounds. And I do that and I don't get any soreness in my back, my knees, anything like that. I'm sleeping really well. I'm eating really well. And, I'm not stressed out. Everything in life's all good. I could do that for several weeks and not have a problem. Put that on the flip side. I see this a lot with new moms. New moms end up in the clinic a lot. They're super stressed out because they've got a crying baby. They're not sleeping because they've got a crying baby. They're trying to fit in meals because they're taking care of another human. And then, so they're doing all those same daily activities, but in an environment where they've got less sleep, less stress. They're totally fatigued. And then they can end up getting hurt and end up having an injury. We see that in sports as well too. There is research to suggest the lower your sleep is, the higher your stress levels are, the higher your injury rate is as well. So I guess that was a little bit of an aside. So that is important. I'll get back to kind of maybe the root of the question that you were trying to get at of, when is it just, when is a kid tired and we should just say like, hey, maybe push through it, or when should we back off? It's a tough question to answer as well, too. I mean, you could kind of talk to your kids and sort of say like, well, did you just get a bad sleep? Did you, are you stressed out? Is there something more going on into there? Not that you have to solve those problems, but just what we call the internal load, like those things that could be driving some of that fatigue. But I think one of the positive things about all the data that we get, most coaches have a velocity gun at this point, or have some sort of a measure that they're measuring for people. You can look at those measures and make a decision based on that. Like if you've got an athlete who's typically throwing 85 miles an hour and they go in their bullpen and they're dropping more than, they've dropped significantly, like all of a sudden they're throwing 80, 81. For me, that would be like, yeah, they're objectively fatigued. They're tired. There's a guy, a trainer that I really like called Bill Miller. And so he does a lot of fatigue readiness testing. And so you can do a simple test to test your athlete's fatigue. Basically, when we do something explosive and high intensity, like a jump, you can measure all your athletes, their best, how much they can jump. And if they jump a certain distance, and all of a sudden, like let's say I can typically jump 5 feet, and then we measure it again and I can only jump 4 feet. It's like, okay, that's, if there's a 10% decrease, then you could say I'm tired, or that athlete's, objectively fatigued. And it probably is, there's some value to what they're saying as opposed to they just want to get out of throwing for that day.
Yeah, because that's something that drives me crazy. Because, I have a hard time understanding my arm is tired. Well, my legs are tired, but I'm still here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough.
But to your point, okay, so now I'm going to look at it a little differently because maybe I don't want to push him because, again, that's something that may lead to an injury. So okay, your arm is tired. Let's take it easy today, and hopefully, tomorrow it's not tired.
Yeah, and they've got there's that is one of the risk factors for injury is trying to throw through fatigue as well. So it's tough. Because every kid's tired is different, right? Like, I'm sure you have kids that go to school, come to practice, and then go home and work a job with their parents or help their parents' business out. And that kid probably doesn't say that he's tired at all, right? So if he's telling you you're tired, you're like, yeah, that kid's tired.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give him a bit of a break.
Yeah.
And you might have a kid that's in a totally different environment where, they're kind of just feeling some muscle soreness and they played long toss and you're progressing them and doing some drills that they're not used to. And they're just saying like, hey, my arm's tired, which is kind of an expected outcome of what you would do for a training program. So yeah, it's hard to give a cut and dry answer for that one, just because it's so athlete dependent on that.
So you just mentioned about risk factors. So let's go through that a little bit. Let's go through, what other than fatigue, there's got to be other risk factors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's several. So I'll do my best to list them all off the top of my head. Your geography, interestingly enough, geography is a risk factor for injury. So athletes from southern states have a higher risk of injury. The thought, and it makes sense, is that those athletes are able to pitch year round. As you said, I'm in Canada, so there's a little bit of a environmental barrier. If there's snow on the ground, it's pretty hard to play baseball. I know some people who went to school in North Dakota and Idaho that would probably differ and fight me on that. But, all that to say, in general, there's that piece. And that's another risk factor is year-round pitching.
Right, but even though, and I'm going to interrupt you a minute there, even in the cold weather, because, I'm in New York, so, it's cold here. Our kids still throw. Like almost 12 months a year, they're in training facilities and they're constantly throwing.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I would say for your youth athletes, for your adolescent and pre-adolescent athletes, so the kids that just started shaving and your kids who aren't shaving yet, that year-round pitching, I would say that's one of the biggest things that needs to change. They need to take that break. Or you're aware of the Pitch Smart, and I'm assuming most of your coaches are aware of the Pitch Smart guidelines as well. So those are great guidelines that coaches can check out, and they give good age recommendations on how many months a year an athlete should be pitching. So for your younger athletes, like your 12, 13-year-olds, they recommend 8 months a year of throwing, no more than 8 months a year. And they recommend 3 months a year of continuously taking off of throwing. So no picking up a baseball for 3 months a year. And there's, and there's a good reason. I always think coaches, people always take up this stuff better when they understand the why behind it. Like if we just say like, hey, don't throw for 12, don't throw 12 months a year. The answer a lot of coaches or clinics or special instruction might give is like, well, yeah, when you're not doing it right and you just leave some kid to his own devices, they're not doing it right. But this 3 months has a really strong basis. When you like throwing is stressful on the arm, we can agree to that, correct? Absolutely. So when you go through a season and you're, hopefully your team's doing well, you make it to the playoffs, reasonably so, you're going to try to, if you've got a competitive athlete, they're going to come back as often as they can and throw as much as the league and the rules allow because everybody wants to win. Winning's great. Yeah. Winning's what makes it fun. But so let's say at some point you do a little bit of a push and you get it wrong, and that athlete's had, not a real injury in terms of if we took an MRI of their rotator cuff or their UCL ligament that we would see like, oh, that's a grade 2 sprain, or that's a full rupture, or that's a partial rotator cuff tear. So nothing would show up, but there can still be these kind of micro injuries, what we call little micro tears. And so when we give them 3 months, for almost every tissue in our body, whether that's ligaments, tendons, muscles, after 3 months, that tissue is healed. So even if we get it a little wrong and that 12-year-old kid has overstressed his arm throughout the course of a year, kids are resilient. And so if you give them that 3 months of no throwing, that allows their ligaments and tendons and everything to totally heal. And then you're, so to speak, as close to square one as you can. Whereas if you interrupt that and you start throwing and you only take a month off, then it's kind of like you got a little scab on your skin and you're picking that scab every time and you never let that scab settle. So like, imagine you got a little scab on your elbow and just, if you pick it once, it's not a big deal. If you just kind of put a bandage on it and let it settle over a couple of weeks. But if for weeks and weeks and weeks you've been picking it, it starts to get infected and all of a sudden it can lead to that bigger problem. And so that's where that year-round throwing is really something that if coaches are encouraging, shut it down for 3 months, if you want to do some indoor instruction, try to keep it to as little or no throwing activities as possible. No reason why an athlete can't swing a bat or something like that, or you can take some ground balls. But particularly for your pitchers, I don't see any reason why you would be, well, I see a reason, everybody wants to get better and improve their mechanics. But I think players, coaches, parents, families would be very wise for your younger athletes in particular to take that 3 months off.
Now, when you say younger athletes and this healing process that takes place, up to what age, roughly?
I mean, well, the healing, 3 months for a tissue to heal is pretty much everybody.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a little bit longer for your, 80-year-olds or everything like that, but we don't need to worry about that. Every athlete with 3 months off is going to benefit. I think it just becomes the period of what's feasible and what's realistic for that athlete's long-term development, right? As a 12-year-old, we probably don't want to be pushing, hey, let's play baseball year round. You are only a baseball player and there's no other sport that you can play. Whereas if you've got a 17-year-old who's throwing 90 miles an hour and he's got some interest from schools, maybe it is in that athlete's best interest to shorten that gap a little bit, or maybe it is in that athlete's best interest to go down to some showcase tournament and shorten that a little bit. So, if we look at the college season, you've got athletes are reporting it's coming right up. Everybody's going down mid-August. They're if you're a freshman, you're throwing for your fall spot. Like some, junior college coach isn't going to be saying like, oh yeah, just don't throw for 3 months. Like, I know you had a long season. I know you're a freshman as a fall, but you're not going to pitch for 3 months. Like, you've got to go down there in the fall and earn your spot. So you do that. I went to school down in California, so we would get we would play my birthday's December 7th, and every year I remember playing on my birthday.
Wow.
So we would get a month off. We would report back January, start of January, and same idea. Pretty much from that point, it's go and you're getting ready for the season.
Yeah.
And then you've got, maybe a week or 2 weeks off, and then you're into summer ball, and then that cycle continues. So I guess for that athlete, again, it really comes down to that athlete dependent. If you've got your workhorse and that freshman goes through that whole spring and, they ended up being a starter and throwing several innings, maybe that's a really great time for that freshman to look and like, hey, I've been throwing from basically, February of my grade 12 high school year, my senior year at high school, to, May, 14 months continuous. I've held up, which is great. Do you have to go play summer ball? I think that would be a fair question to ask, because maybe that is a great timeline where it's like, okay, let's not throw for that 2 or 3 months. Let everything heal, let everything settle. As a freshman in high school, there's still going to be lots of room for most kids to increase the other physical pieces of that strength, get in the weight room, because for a freshman in college, that's going to be one of the best times. That's those summer months in the summer where you can get some really uninterrupted training, and you're not trying to save something in the tank for practice later that day, or save something in the tank for the big conference game that's coming up in a couple days. So, that would be my recommendation of sort of that summer there if you need to. Whereas if you take another athlete who, made the team, kind of pitched the minimum, maybe they kind of regret not redshirting, they pitched 5 or 10 innings, maybe if that kid wants to go play summer ball, then that's kind of a really great opportunity for him to develop. So there's no perfect answer for everybody. It's different, but the longer you can give of uninterrupted time, even 6 weeks is going to give you a lot of time to help everything heal. That's kind of what I say for a lot of people that come into the clinic. It's like, well, the easy answer is we can shut you down for 6 weeks, and we have a very clear path of how we're going to get you better, but you're probably going to hate me as a physical therapist if I just tell you to stop doing everything every time it hurts.
Right.
So yeah, I guess basically the more and more, once they get those 16, 17, 18-year-olds, ideally we would live in a world where we could just give them 3 or 4 months off. 3 months off, I think it's great. That's not the reality of a lot of situations. I still think if it's possible, they should. Anecdotally, I would say I got a little bit frustrated in February this year. I had 4 baseball pitchers come in on my caseload with sore arms in February. And, we're in Canada. It still wasn't baseball weather. There was no teams that were having games. So for me, it's like, this was not we've got the training program wrong. We've got the throwing program wrong, whether that's the athlete or the coach or whoever. But either way, it was like, okay, this was you guys got a whoopsie. Yeah. And to speak to that point, all of those athletes that came in, when I asked them, when did you stop throwing for their winter, none of them ended up taking that 3-month period off. Most of them were taking a month to kind of, 2 months maximum. So I do still think there's value for those later high school kids to take 3 months off throwing too.
What I like about that is I'm a big proponent of taking time off. Okay. And I always said that I don't necessarily had it, or I never necessarily had a set time, but my reasoning was totally different than what you just explained. Mine was because I think you need to reset mentally. I think you need to just get away from the game and get excited about it again. So now what I love about what you just said is now I have another reason. Okay. There's actually a scientific reason why you should stop throwing for 3 months, plus the mental side of it. It's a win-win thing.
Yeah.
It's great. I love it.
Exactly. I know you had kind of chatted about earlier about how big you're into the mental piece too. And I mean, totally aside from the physical and injuries and everything like that, but developing as a person outside of being a baseball player, and kids having an identity outside of baseball is so important. Like playing college baseball, and then when that college baseball finishes, and there's always that good chunk of people who are just totally lost for several years after playing, because it's like since they were like 3, 4, 5 years old, to the time when they graduate at 23 years old, it's like they are a baseball player. And then you take that away very suddenly. Like, it's like your last game ends and all of a sudden you are no longer a baseball player. And it's like, well, what's your good in the world exactly? And yeah, so the more people can actually develop that other positive, relationships that are totally disconnected from baseball, I think even just mentally speaking is such a positive. I always know when I dated girlfriends that had nothing to do with baseball, I always preferred that than when I had girlfriends that knew more that was going on. You could just go home and be like, you gotta go today, be like, awful, let's not talk about it.
That's funny. So let's talk about how many pitches per game. Okay, so 80 pitches per game. Talk about that.
Yeah. So that's what we had talked about on the the pre-cut a little more.
The misfire.
Yeah. So maybe I'll give everybody a little more context. So the Pitch Smart guidelines, I think, are really good guidelines to go off of. They were created from people who know far more about baseball injuries than me.
I'm gonna interrupt you there about the Pitch Smart because there's something I want to say, and then I'm sorry, but I got to get this in. So where I coach my high school baseball, they have pitch count rules.
Yeah.
And there is no way in hell, me as a coach, that I would follow those rules because they're ridiculous, okay? And people are going to get hurt. I follow Pitch Smart, okay? And which is a lot less pitches than the high school association allows them to throw. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I had to throw that in there.
Well, hey, that's great. That's great. I mean, everybody's different. Like where every association's different too, right? Like where I live in British Columbia. There's a couple different leagues, and so the one league does have, it's called Arm Smart up here in Canada. That they've got recommendations that are pretty similar to Pitch Smart. And then one of the leagues has no pitch count recommendations for 14 to 18-year-old. Like, they don't have any hard limits. I mean, obviously they have recommendations, but there's no pitch count rules unless that's changed outside of my knowledge. So, yeah, it's definitely that. I mean, I think that's a good approach of following. Yeah.
But my go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
My point there, and it's a quick point, is that coaches will look at that and say, well, the league says that I could throw a guy 120 pitches, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm like, that's insane. So let's go back to the 80 pitches because that interests me.
Well, I just want to tip my hat to you for doing that as well, too, because I think that takes a lot of courage. And I think that shows me kind of some wisdom for you as a coach, too, because there's probably been games that you lost because you pulled kids that's been cruising. But you're like, hey, I'm in the best interest of this kid as opposed to the best interest of this game.
Now you just led me into it, and I always tell stories. Now I got to tell a story, and then we'll get back. Then we'll get back to the 80 pitches. So I'm coaching a 14U travel team. Kid's on the mound. He's throwing a no-hitter. Right. His dad actually happened to be the guy who did the game changer for the team. Okay. So a couple of the parents came over to him and said, hey, your son is throwing a no-hitter. This is fantastic. He turns around and he looks at me and goes, don't matter. So I said, what do you mean? So he says, well, he's got 5 more pitches. Coach is going to come out of the dugout and pull him. Like that. So he goes, what do you mean? He's not going to let him finish the no-hitter? He goes, he doesn't care. And sure enough, whatever it was, 5 pitches later, I come out, I pull the kid out of the game. Somebody else came, closed it out. And, my feeling is that he was 14 years old. Nobody gives a crap whether you threw a no-hitter when you were 14 or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But your arm is forever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Your body's irreplaceable. Yeah. No, it's, I think that's excellent as well too. I think on it, it's so easy. I'm a victim of it myself too. Like, I mean, I go watch my nephew's baseball games and you're like, yeah, like, let's win this game. Like, that's what we got to do to win. But it's such an important lesson, I think, for kids and families to remember and kind of zoom out of that too, of like, hey, like, there are bigger things in the world than the outcome of this game. We're going back to that mental piece as well too. Like, it all kind of ties into that of just, there's, if you, you're I guess worth as a person should not be determined by how good of a player you are as a 14-year-old, or accomplishments as a 14-year-old.
Right, right. It doesn't. It doesn't. Again, we can go off on a tangent and go. People
Totally.
complain about stats and this and that. Oh, my son, you gave my son, and nobody gives a crap. He's 14 years old. Nobody cares. Except for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So.
Well, yeah, 80 pitches. So,
yes.
Yeah, there's some research and some studies that have come out that basically show high school. This one's for high school pitchers. The one study that's on the top of my mind was for high school pitchers in particular. And high school pitchers that throw more than 80 pitches in a game are 4 times more likely to require surgery. The other number that kind of pops up somewhere around that 75 to 80 pitch mark seems to be, if you were being really conservative, would be the mark where I would probably, like, if you're going to be really conservative, like what's the most we can do to stop injuries? That seems to be the number where after that you're starting to edge into a little bit of damage. So the other couple studies that have come out, and they've both shown same things. They were on different body parts. The one on the top of my head was for the elbow, and the other one was for the shoulder. And so they either did an MRI or an ultrasound on those body parts, and they did one before and after the game. So they took an MRI, looked at the results, then they got the kid to throw, and they would, or the several athletes to throw, and then however many pitches they would throw, they would kind of mark it down and then look at the ultrasound and MRI and see if anything changed. And what they found was that over 75 pitches, you could start to see some objective signs of inflammation on the ultrasound or on the MRI. So basically, after 75 pitches, they were that inflammation is a sign that, hey, objectively, you maybe had one of those little micro injuries. You kind of ticked something off, and so that's where you continue to do that for years. And one game, no big deal, and your body heals quickly. But you continue to do that for years and years and years. And then that's where you can start to get kind of those degenerative changes that go down the path into there. So, yeah, 75, 80 pitches. That seems to be sort of the number of what athletes can tolerate before they start, or at least what youth athletes can tolerate before they start to get some objective signs of damage.
We talked about it before. Where guys, they'll leave guys out there for 120 pitches. I mean, I can say that I think that this season, I think it was only 2 times where I had a kid that pitched over 90 pitches. Okay, so usually my guys were right around that, we'll say 75 to 85 pitch mark.
Okay.
And my feeling is that, first of all, I'm watching the pitcher. I could tell he's getting tired. And I should have other pitchers that could come in and pick up the slack for another 30, 40 pitches, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So why am I going to beat this kid up and destroy him? We're a team.
Yeah.
Let's all get together. Let's all work to get the win.
Yeah.
Rather than ride this guy.
Well, and I think that's one of the benefits of taking that sort of approach as well, too, is you're going to develop your better pitchers. Like, we don't know, the kids when I was 12, 13, 14, who are the best players on the team and the best pitchers on the team are not necessarily all of the kids that went on to have the most successful careers in college and professional baseball. It's hard to predict. Like, a local story from around here probably wouldn't ring a bell. But his name was Scott Richmond. He had a bit of a cup of coffee. He played in the big leagues for the Toronto Blue Jays for a little bit. When he got cut from his high school team when he was like 16 or 17 years old, he ended up getting picked up in a college and got tons and tons better. If you were a 16-year-old coach on the team and you were to say, like, hey, which ones are going to be the big leaguers? Scott Richmond probably wouldn't have been the one that got picked, and he outperformed all of his teammates. But if you're kind of making that workhorse do all of the tasks as a 14, 15-year-old, you totally shut out the other kids' chances to develop. So, yeah, if you're a program that's looking at long-term development of athletes as well, too, making sure other kids and putting other kids in pressure situations is only going to benefit. You're going to end up producing more players, more quality players that are better. And I mean, really, exactly. What's the benefit of a high school kid throwing an extra 20 pitches a game? Again, like we just said, does their does their 14, 15-year-old Legion team or whatever tournament that they're playing in or team that they're playing in, if you win or lose that game, or, they threw 20 more pitches, is that going to be the difference? Or, are they going to be more kind of happy with their college career if they're still able to avoid an injury and continue playing on in college or professional baseball? And it looks good for you as a coach too. Who doesn't want to say, like, yeah, I've got way more pro and college baseball players. Like, that's what attracts good programs and good teams too.
That's what we're supposed to be doing, right? Is developing players. I mean, again, it's another pet peeve of mine where coaches they'll have two good pitchers on their staff, let's say, high school team, and they'll ride them because they want to win and they want to try and, win the section. Well, wait a minute. You've got, 7, 8, 9, 10 pitchers. What about the other guys? They can't pitch. What are they doing on your team?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's, I mean, I would argue that it's a reflection of the coach too, right? Like if we only got a couple good players, it's like, great, you got a couple naturally gifted athletes. Like, be a coach. Well, coach up the other kids. If they suck at the start of the year, that's fine. It's not your fault. But if they suck at the end of the year, I'm going to put a little bit of responsibility on you too.
Exactly. The thing that you had mentioned about the player Richmond, okay?
Yeah.
As you can imagine, I've been doing this for a long time. And what you said, and I want people out there to understand this, what you said about that player happens more times than people imagine. They look at kids at very young ages, and this kills me. So they'll look at players, 12, 13, 14 years. Oh, that kid's no good. That kid's no good. You don't know yet. You don't know.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. People are surprising. People are amazing. I always have such a soft spot for that. I always felt like that kind of underdog too, who was sort of like just physically ungifted. And it was like, hey, I'll see you. Like, I'll see you arriving, getting out of the car at practice, and like, I'll see you getting in your car at practice as well too. And like, let's see what happens 4 years down the road. That was, I think, one of my favorite. It was always such a backhanded compliment, but for some reason it kind of fed me. You'd get this kid who was more talented, who was competing. I can remember this specific spot down when I was in college with this specific conversation. It was this kid who was just far more physically gifted than me, just faster, stronger, all of those things. And we're taking batting practice, and it was the fall. And he is struggling, and I'm hitting really well all fall, just no dingers, but just like lots of hard line drives, lots of doubles.
Yep.
And and he's sitting there, and and the coach is kind of being like, like, you can do this, you can perform, like, Jay can do it. Like, you're more talented than Jay. Like, if Jay can do it, like, there's no reason why he can't do it. Yeah. Like, yeah, well, fair enough. But like, I've got, exactly.
Yeah,
Give me.
It happens a lot. I've seen it many, many times. But I don't know. Again, it's just it's the world we live in. And again, I shouldn't say it's the world we live in because it's always kind of been that way. But yeah, kids develop at different rates. Kid may peak at 12, 13 years old. He may be a stud at 12, 13, but he may have peaked. Where another kid doesn't peak until he's 19. It happens.
Yeah, exactly.
But, let's see. You know what? Let's talk about a preseason throwing program. Tell me what you think players should be doing preseason.
Again, it depends, like every answer. But I think that, the preseason is going to be one of your most vulnerable times of injury. So let's see, I'll pick on another sport. I'll pick on runners right now. So another springtime comes around, the weather starts getting nice. Everybody's like, oh, I've been on the couch for 3 months. I got to get outside and get active. I'm going to start running. There's a 10K or a half marathon that I'm going to sign up for, and runners start going out. And, they were really good runners, but they've been on the couch for a while. And then all of a sudden they try to run with that same running volume, and some sort of an injury comes up, whether that's their hip, knee, Achilles tendon. So the same thing happens with your throwers as well too. Like if you're shutting a kid down, which we're just talked about recommending, like, hey, let's shut this kid down for 3 months during the winter, play another sport, and come back in the fall. You've got somebody who's going to have a lot reduced capacity to be able to tolerate the high throwing volume. So it's not just about the pitch counts as well too. A kid who's been well conditioned and well trained and has been kind of got that throwing program and their throwing volume and intensity right throughout the year, that 90 pitch outing in July might not cause them any pain or injury. But if you throw them out game one and they've just come off their basketball playoffs and haven't thrown it all, and you throw them out for 90 pitches, they're going to be pretty sore, right?
Yeah.
So your preseason is really a great time to start to build up and slowly, gradually build up that throwing volume. And so, that I would say kind of taking 4 weeks in general, taking 4 weeks prior to getting your kids or getting your athletes onto the mound and going through a slow throwing progression is going to allow them to, is going to just build up the capacity and give their tendons, ligaments, everything just a little bit of time to adapt. So when you do get into that throwing volume, that they're going to be, that their risk for injury is going to be a little bit minimized. What we see from a lot of other body parts is that it's not so much. I mean, it is, of course, to an extent. I'm going to use runners as an example just because they're so easy to measure what they're doing. It's just kilometers, miles, whatever distance they're running. So it's not so much the distance that runners are running. Sorry, I'm in Canada, so I got to do 10, a runner who runs 10 kilometers a week or 40 kilometers a week. You're going to have to do the math on miles right now. Sorry. But their injury rates are about the same. So, you would think like, oh, that runner's running 4 times more, they're going to have more. And that doesn't seem to be such a big thing. But it's when you have this big spike in volume that you're going to have those big risks of injury. So if a 10-kilometer-a-week runner who's just saying like, yeah, I run 5Ks twice a week to, hey, I'm going to run a marathon and I'm going to hop into this training program that I found online and I run 4 to 10-kilometer runs in a week, their body doesn't have enough time to adapt in that short period. And so that's when the injury occurs. And so you've got to kind of take that same approach as a runner and do that with your pitching athletes. I was making fun of my girlfriend and we'll go back in time to February. And, I've got my pitching athletes in here that are both struggling with arm injuries. The other kind of common thread between all of them is they would have 2 winter sessions for their teams. Wednesday, they would kind of throw and do sort of a 90 to 120 foot throw. And then they would get access to a mound and have access to an indoor bullpen on Saturday or Sunday. And so they would throw these 30 pitch bullpens, high intensity, max effort on Saturday or Sunday. And, at the same time, my girlfriend had decided last summer that she was going to be running a half marathon. And January, February came around and I'm like, Janelle, you have not been training for this marathon. Like it's in 3 months. Like you got to start running. And she's like, I think my plan is going to be like next Saturday, I'm going to go out and run a 10K, see how that feels. The week after I'll add to 12K and go there. And I'm like, the physical therapist inside of me is like, Janelle, you're going to make me look like an idiot. Like you're going to get hurt and everybody's going to think I'm dumb because of it. So I would tell that story to my pitchers. I would be like, hey, here's my girlfriend. This is her plan for trying to run a marathon. And they would laugh just like you're laughing. Like, that's a terrible plan. I'm like, yeah, that's a terrible plan. Let's look at your throwing program right now. Like, oh, they look really similar. maybe that we can learn.
Exactly. Oh God. But yeah, I mean, it's a very important thing. Preseason is because, again, I don't know if a lot of people understand what it means to ramp pitchers up. We get them, we start working out with them in January and, everything is low volume, low intent, just so we get the arm moving. And, then what we'll do is we'll increase the volume, but the intent won't go up. Okay. So again, we're getting their arm loose, we're getting it going. And then we start working the other way around where we start going low volume, high intent, and then we slowly increase. So people need to understand that there's a process to ramping these kids up. And one of the things that blew me away this year, the program that I'm coaching in now, this was my first year. And I had kids that weren't coming to my winter workout because they were throwing high intent, full intent bullpens Saturday at a training facility. And I'm like, no, I want to make my head explode.
Yeah.
I have no control over it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's where the parents come in as well too, right? Like parents just got to get educated on that as well. Their parents are just trying to do their best for their kids, and yeah, they're, trying to get that special instruction is big, and whether that's for good or bad, the more it's definitely tough I feel for coaches. I feel for everybody. Like there's the pressure on the kid and the families that they just want to do the best, and you've got a talented kid who wants to take to the next level. And then, but yeah, there's no way that the person who's doing the instruction is going to interact with your throwing program. Like it sounds like you've got a really perfect plan on how to ramp up a pitcher.
Oh,
And then, yeah, it's, that communication piece, when you start to add two more people, can definitely start to get, exactly. Two people can be thinking two different things or have two different philosophies. And that makes it tough. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the more parents, families, and coaches are kind of like, understand like this is the process as well too. Hopefully the more that stuff starts to kind of happen less.
Now I'm going to throw you a curveball.
All right.
Let's talk about stretching a little bit, because
Sure.
I went through your program a little bit and I listened to what you said about stretching, and I'm like, I don't know. He's going to have to convince me about that.
All right. So here's another kind of, I guess, reason of why I made this program. I hate driving by, whether it's a baseball or a soccer or a football field, and I see 20 people going around and just going into a hamstring stretch. Like as a baseball athlete, let's take a catcher. Let's look at a position, a catcher. Your hamstring is a hip extender and a knee flexor. And so when you flex your hip, which is that typical hamstring stretch, and straighten your knee, your hamstrings get stretched. If we look at a catching position, your hips are flexed, but your knees are also totally flexed. So the hamstring is under no stretch. You don't need hamstring flexibility to be a catcher. So why are we spending so much time in practice stretching your calf, stretching your hamstring, when we don't need the flexibility in those things necessarily? Not that there's never value to it. People can take me to task on this too. If you go through my course and go through everything, I provide all of the context for it, and hopefully I will convince you. But, if we look at when we look at warm-up programs and injury prevention programs, the research, and, there's something I got to get a little sciencey here, but I'll walk you through what we're going. There's something called a meta-analysis. Like not all studies are created equal. If I do a study and I'm trying to sell, I'm trying to sell a water bottle, and I talk about, I research everybody and say, if you drink my water bottle, your health will improve 20 times. And I manipulate that study. It's not the truth, right? Whereas if you're like, I know Jay's full of crap with this water bottle, I'm going to do this study, and all these other people from outside do these studies, and you're like, yeah, we tested that water bottle, and there's nothing there. And so meta-analyses and systematic reviews, what they do is they take all of the studies on a different topic and they combine it. And the benefit of that is you kind of combine it. People have biases. There's all these other parties that are doing it. And then everybody does something a little bit different, right? Like maybe I do a hamstring stretching program and you're like, oh, hamstring stretching saves injuries. Or I say, well, I don't think it does. And my hamstring stretching protocol is, one time a week we stretch for 10 seconds and that's it. Of course, that's not going to be enough. And so it also combines the way that people do things. And so it kind of pools everything. And so there's these studies that have basically tens of thousands of people in these studies. And they've got, labs from all over the world with all different philosophies and views. And so two studies that have come out in the last decade, so this is 10-year-old research as well, is basically exercise and warm-up programs that include stretching they have about a 4 or 5% benefit. So they don't seem to have, maybe a little bit of a benefit. Whereas when we look at strengthening programs, particularly for injury prevention programs or balance exercises, programs that include strengthening and balance exercises has a 45% reduction in injury, and strengthening programs have a 70% reduction in injury.
Wow.
And when we look at the demands of sport again, when baseball is a very high intensity sport, right? Like if let's take a look at an elastic band. If I stretch out an elastic band and it becomes a little more lax, I'm not going to be able to shoot that elastic band quite as far, right? If I've got a tight elastic band and I shoot it, it's going to fly a little bit further. So if you're spending minutes and minutes prior to your power-based exercises, which is what you need for baseball, stretching things out, again, there's some nuance here when we talk about the arm. There's value to still having good movement in the shoulder, and pitchers are a little different. But we're going to look at just the lower body, so we don't have to get too complicated. There's not, in general, and everybody's different, but in general, if we're looking at broad, what can we do the best for everybody if we throw sort of one program that's going to fit as best we can everybody, stretching doesn't seem to have the best the best prevention on injuries, whereas, activating those muscles, maybe doing some squats, some single leg squats, some side lunges is going to be the thing that's going to have better injury prevention. And that's not to say that stretching isn't helpful for performance. Like everybody's different. There are about 20% of the people walking around that are what we call hypermobile. So they've got more movement than general. You can test this with your teams. Get everybody to put together and stand with their feet together and straighten their legs, and then get everybody to touch your toes. A handful of kids are going to be able to put their palms on the floor and kind of look around like what's everybody's deal? What's going on? Those kids have more mobility than normal. Those kids don't need to stretch. They've already got more mobility. Where if you take someone like me, I try and bend down and touch my toes, there's still quite a big gap. For me, getting some more movement in my body is going to be helpful prior to the game. Like when you're hitting and throwing, you require a lot of thoracic rotation. So there's lots of, thankfully, so there's a lot of thoracic mobility drills that are getting really popular that I'm seeing lots of baseball teams doing, which is great. If you come to my rec league game, you're going to see me do some hip rotation, like some sort of, the 90-90 hip stretches. You're going to see me do some sort of a thoracic rotation stretch, because I'm a really stiff body. So if I can get a little bit more movement, I'm going to have the ability to produce more power, right? Like, if I'm trying to do the Karate Kid finger punch, I'm not going to have nearly as much power if I wind up or I'm going to have way more power if I wind up and swing at it.
Right. And
so, there is still value to stretching for performance, I guess. But I do think it's overhyped. I guess that's the other, I know a lot of coaches as well, and sometimes you just hear kind of offhand comments of coaches blaming kids, like, oh yeah, we got a lot of injuries on the team this year, like our kids aren't taking stretching seriously. And I just kind of want to pull my hair out of maybe we need to take a look at your, the same program, the same warm-up routine that my gym teacher gave to me in grade 8 is like the science has changed, and we've thankfully adapted and got a little better. And so there is some, I do provide in my course and injury prevention program and a good warm-up program that coaches can use. I do have some stretches in there. I'm not totally against stretching, but I do think that there's a time and place. And I do think that it's very much overhyped in terms of injury prevention. The research just doesn't back it up.
So we just had on Dave Clay, who teaches motor preferences. And, basically the way he explained it is, and again, I'm summing it up. Mike Trout does not swing the same way Bryce Harper does. If you try to make Bryce Harper swing like Mike Trout, he's not going to be as good as he is, and vice versa. So is that kind of something like what you're saying with the stretching? It's more of an individualistic thing? One kid may need to stretch more than another on a certain thing, and vice versa.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. Like again, when we look at mobility, a good chunk of mobility is just genetic, right? Like if you've got both your parents are able to put their feet together and keep their knees straight and put their palms on the floor, genetically, you're just going to be more flexible than I ever am. Even if I'm trying to stretch my toes as best as I can, or, stretch down and touch my toes as best as I can, it's going to take my whole life of very consistent effort to get to that level. Whereas, like we said, other people don't. I get 70-year-olds in here sometimes that are coming off with some sort of a knee replacement or something, and I like to get a just general screen of people. I always try to get people to touch their toes. It just gives me some information. And yeah, you'll get these 70-year-olds sometimes that just put their palms on the floor, and you're like, wow. They're like, yeah, I've always been able to do that. And it's like, yeah, well, I've never been able to do that. So good for you. But yeah, exactly. Everybody's a little different. And I think the piece to note, and why, another thing to keep in mind, the people who are hypermobile are going to be a lot more likely to get dislocations. So, I mean, let's look at it when we talk. Let's get into a little bit of the nuance of the shoulder. So when we're talking about layback, going into that's external rotation of your shoulder. Exactly. Yeah. So the most common 97% of dislocations are anterior. And so when you're going into layback, the ball, the humerus, is going anteriorly. So it's sliding forward into the socket. So if you've got a kid who is hypermobile and they've had, let's say they're, a football player, or when they're hypermobile, sometimes these people will just get dislocations out of the blue. I played with a guy who got a dislocation just from swinging a bat.
Wow.
Just a non-traumatic thing. He's there's a little test that we use, and he is the top of the top hypermobile. And you're sitting into there, stretching into this already lax ligament, you might actually be doing them damage. Whereas again, if you take a stiff body like me, I have, maybe average external rotation, but baseball pitchers and baseball throwers typically want more than average external rotation. It's probably going to be helpful for me to stretch my shoulder, because it's actually going to take some stress off of somewhere down my arm, down the chain, where it's going to allow, that energy to flow a little bit more smoothly. Whereas if you take that kid who's hypermobile with that shoulder dislocation, you might actually be driving part of their pain problem. So yeah, there's stretching in general can be helpful for some people, not helpful for other people. But in general, strengthening exercises, we can kind of say are going to be helpful. You can't go wrong getting strong, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we just hit an hour, and I'm not done with you yet. So a couple of things that I want to go over, and then I'm going to let you go.
All right.
So the first thing is the Throwers 10 versus the Yokohama 9.
Yeah.
Let's go over that a little bit.
Sure. What do you want to know about it?
What are they, and what are they for, and everything about them?
So they're both two different injury. The Yokohama 9 is a warm-up program, and the Throwers 10 is a injury prevention program. The Throwers 10 was developed by, again, those smart people, some of the same smart people who developed Pitch Smart. Kevin Wilk was one of the key people in Throwers 10. There's another name that I'm missing, so I apologize to that person. They do deserve credit. It's just not on my head right now. But smart people who are working with arm injuries and working with a lot of pro baseball players, and so they did a lot of research on what are the muscles and what are the joints that are used for baseball throwing, and so they developed the Throwers 10, which targets all of those muscles. And so there's 10 exercises. They're relatively simple that throwers can go to, and they target your scapular muscles, your rotator cuff muscles, your forearm muscles, which are going to give us the best bet. Again, the Throwers 10 is all strengthening exercises, if I can remember correctly, which is going to give you the best bet on, injury prevention in those areas. Again, you can get a lot more complicated, but it's a really good starting point of, hey, if you have nothing and you're not doing an injury prevention program and you're running a youth team and you don't have a strength and conditioning background, which a lot of coaches don't, which is fine. It's an easy template that you can start with. the Yokohama 9, I would say, again, if you're a dad or a mom or whoever coaching some baseball team that's coaching 8 to 11-year-olds, the Yokohama 9 is another research warm-up program. And they did 2 studies on it in Japanese youth athletes, 8 to 11. And both studies found close to a 50% reduction in elbow injuries in those 8 to 11-year-olds by doing it. And so the Yokohama 9, it's 9 stretching exercises, 9 strengthening exercises, and it's a little warm-up routine that coaches can run through. Again, they're pretty simple. The Yokohama 9, actually, if people do want to go to my YouTube page, Pioneer Coaches Education, I do run through all of the exercises and all the videos, and I go through kind of some of the benefits and maybe some of the limitations of the Yokohama 9. And yeah, the Throwers 10, I would say the limitations of the Throwers 10 are that it's not progressive. Like, again, another thing that I find a lot when I see athletes, a lot of pitchers are thankfully pretty good with doing some sort of an arm care routine. Like, they know, like, injuries are a thing. I need to do, whether that's bands, I need to do some sort of an arm care routine. The piece that they miss sometimes is you sort of say, like, oh, like, what are you doing for your arm care routine? And they go, I'm doing some, like, banded external rotation, some banded internal rotation, some rows with the bands. And you go, like, great, like, how tense is the band? And they're like, oh, I don't know, just whatever's in the bag. And you're like, oh, well, like, how many do you do? And they're like, I do 3 sets of 10. And you're like, okay, if I paid you $1,000 for every one that you could do, how many could you do? And they're like, I could do 1,000 probably. And you're like, well, like that's probably not pushing the needle on actually training your body to adapt. Like, the goal of the exercises, there's so many programs, there's so many exercises out there. It's not so much about finding a magic exercise or a magic program. It's more about finding, okay, what we need to target the main muscle groups that are used for throwing, and we need to progressively overload them to get them stronger to cause adaptation.
Makes sense.
And so, yeah, that would be the one piece, I guess, that's the important piece of the Throwers 10. And I think the Throwers 10, they recommend just doing sort of 3 sets of 10. If we really want to get into the strength and conditioning piece, which there's definitely value in doing, there's value to doing more than 10 reps. There's value to doing less than 10 reps. There's value to really kind of pushing those exercises, which, the Throwers 10 doesn't really go in. So it's Throwers 10 benefits. They hit every muscle group. You're getting a comprehensive program. Downsides, if kind of kids are just left to their own devices to do it, it'll probably just turn into a mindless little arm care routine. Whereas if you're smart and you kind of can progress coaches through that, then they're going to, it is going to be a really good program and works from there. And I kind of talk through a lot more in depth in the course about what people can do, how they can, when we should maybe go higher, maybe when we should go lower, all of those things. So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring it up because I wanted people to understand that there are, these 2 programs out there that are, they seem to me to be very simple, right?
Yeah.
That, moms and dads and, youth coaches can work with their players and use it, that are going to help their players.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm working with a kind of a passionate group of people. One of the cool things that's come out of this course is I've got to meet other like-minded people about this. And there's a group in British Columbia here that we're trying to get some healthcare professionals together to kind of give some information out to coaches that they can just freely use. And so there's something in soccer called the FIFA 11 Plus. And so basically FIFA, the big soccer governing body, came in and was like, yeah, there's a lot of hamstring injuries, ACL injuries, ankle sprains, like, what can we do to give a warm-up program? And so they gave these 11 exercises to kids. Or not to kids, to all teams, and they see pretty good reduction in injuries, like I think 30 to 40%.
Right.
And so anyway, one of the people was kind of talking about like, yeah, like what if we made like a FIFA 11 for baseball? And it's kind of like, yeah, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is already stuff out there, right? Like, there is some good resources. So hopefully people are accessing that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's very important. So I'm going to go to one more thing, and then we're going to close this out. What does an arm care program need? Oh,
good question. Oh, I don't want to get this one wrong. I know I'm going to miss something too. I'm going to be emailing you. I imagine, be like, make sure to include this. Um, okay. An arm care program needs to address the scapula muscles or the shoulder blade muscles. An arm care program needs to address the rotator cuff, definitely through external rotation. That's one of the strongest things that you need to get stronger. I believe that an arm care program must include forearm strengthening as well. I think we've done a really good job. If we look at injury rates, injuries 20 years ago, there was a lot more baseball injuries in the shoulders, and they moved down to the elbow. I think if you even look at from a strength and conditioning perspective, we've gotten really good at giving good shoulder and good strengthening exercises. We haven't really found that with the elbow. And again, even with talking with athletes and coaches, a lot of their arm care programs don't include some sort of a forearm strengthening thing. So I would say it's got to include some sort of a forearm strengthening thing. I might even argue a bicep strengthening thing, exercise as well too. Your bicep is taking a lot of force of the elbow. There's some smart people out there who would probably take me to task on that and disagree with me. I think so maybe it doesn't have to include a bicep strengthening thing. So disregard that. There's my own little personal flair. Yeah. The last thing that I think it has to be challenging, like we kind of talked about with that just kind of flying through. If it's not challenging, you're wasting your time, and everybody's wasting their time, and you're not getting better. It makes my job easy when people come in and they're like, I do an arm care routine. And you're like, oh, well, you're not, because you're not doing that. Like, do the same exercises, just do them harder. And I'm like, yeah, my arm care routine's working a lot better, but that's okay. I'm up for more of a challenge. So hopefully everybody's coming in with those arm care pieces, and then we can really dig into some more of the nuance of what's going on with and have more time to spend some other stuff talking about other things with those hurt athletes.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something, okay? I appreciate you bearing with me and being such a great sport, by me screwing up and not hitting the record button. And look, it was a great conversation. I loved it. And I know that everybody out there is going to be able to gain a lot of knowledge from this.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate that. You come from high standing in the coaches world. So it's and just talking to you too, you can tell you're a good coach. If I would send my nephews your way, definitely, if you're in our area.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Listen, give everybody your contact information. If anybody wants to reach out, they want to ask you questions, let them know where to get to you.
Yeah, fire away. You can reach me on Instagram, Pioneer Coach Education, Facebook as well, Pioneer Coaches Education, _S. Email as well. You can email me at pioneercoacheducation, all one word, @gmail.com. If viewers want to sign, I send a little newsletter that I've been starting as well too, where I kind of send out little weekly kind of 1 or 2 minute reads. Maybe not weekly. I'm not going to hold myself to weekly. I'm going to send out when I can and when I will.
Yeah.
Little tips that coaches can use and take away for that. And so, they're welcome to sign up on MailChimp for that. Again, it's under Pioneer Coaches Education. But yeah, please do reach out. I'm sure I've said some stuff that some people disagree with, which is great. And so hopefully we can, hopefully people have some questions. As long as people like or dislike, as long as they were listening, because I'm sure, like you said, everybody got something out of it, or at least very, view things in a little bit of a different way, or question how you practice, how you do things. Because we got to do something. It's not working from everybody's perspective, from a healthcare perspective, from a coach's perspective. Like, something's got to change. There's a lot of things. I don't know. There's probably not a silver bullet, but we got to do something differently.
Oh yeah. I mean, the amount of injuries are insane. We could debate it, forever, because, it's only a 1 hour show. We can go on for 2-3 hours on that type of stuff. But look, I think if people listen to what you had to say and they follow through on a little bit of it, who knows? It's all about the kids. Let's face it. It really is. Yeah. Let's take care of the kids.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So once again, thank you for being a good sport. And, we'll we'll stay in touch. And if I need to know anything about what I should be doing about a pitcher's arm, I'll reach out to you.
Yeah, please do. Please do. No, thank you so much for having Jim and me. I've had a lot of fun talking too.
Great, Jay. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the week.
I will. You too.
Thanks. So now we know the signs to look for when a player comes to us and they tell us that they're injured. What's really an injury? What may be a minor injury? What might just be fatigue? So I know that I learned a lot, and I hope everybody out there did too. I really want to thank Jay for coming on the show and having this conversation with us. I hope everyone out there enjoys it as much as I did. So once again, everybody, follow us on Facebook, follow us on X, and go to the new website, thectbshow.net. Please leave us a review. Reach out to us. Sign up to be a guest on the show. We really love to hear from everybody out there. And listen, we got a lot of great guests coming up. We're jammed up for the next few weeks, so hopefully we'll be able to roll these things out really quick. And again, hopefully everybody out there can get 1% better every day. You know, the stuff that Jay taught us is only going to help us as coaches to make people understand that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.